I'm Jim Fisher with Fisher Compliance. Today I'm going to present to the Santa Ana River Basin, very pleased to present here, some best practices for and proactive measures for SSMP and SEWER program success. Starting off with a couple of questions. How well do you think your SSMP complies with the WDRs on a scale from 1 to 5, something to ponder? While we're going through here, how effective do you think your SSMP is at reducing SSOs from 0 to 5? And last, if inspectors arrive tomorrow from the EPA or water boards or even an NGO, how successful do you think you'd be on a scale from 0 to 5? These are good ones to think about during this presentation, and including maybe some areas you might want to look at again later to refine your program. Here are the main topics I'm going to discuss today in the video, starting with audits and enforcement, just a background of review, some of the information the water boards is using right now to stay on top of the latest tips. And then 2 and 3, also tips on evaluating effectiveness and resiliency for the proposed new staff informal draft that's out right now, WDRs. Number 4, some BMPs, best management practices to share from other agencies. And finally, at the end, recommendations on audits. So just background review. Audits, they've been going around for a long time. The water board's doing inspections and audits. They kind of call them the same thing, not to be confused with the SSMP internal audit that's done either by yourselves or by an outside party or another agency. So you'll hear that term, audits and inspections, are kind of interchanged from the water boards. One of the important areas that's always recommended is the water quality enforcement policy. I'm going to walk through a couple case scenarios here, but just kind of knowing the policy, knowing what the authority is for the water boards. You definitely want to be on the left if you're going to have any enforcement, verbal warning, enforcement letter, or NOV. Those are all fine compared to the ones on the right, which are basically the formal actions. I'm going to go through some of the formal actions here, the administrative civil liability actions here, including the calculation or the estimation for the economic benefit. This is an area that a lot of the people I've been talking with lately don't understand really well. It's really worth going and looking at some examples. I've got a couple here in the presentation today to show some of the latest examples from Southern California and the San Diego region. Economic benefit shall be estimated for every violation, okay? And this is for every violation and any penalty action. And it's any savings or monetary gain derived from the act or emission that constitutes the violation. So in other words, if there was a violation, was there any postponement, delay, the pump station upgrades, the treatment system that failed to do adequate control measures, such as having a good SSMP that can reduce spills, what could have and should have been done ahead of time, were the audits not done? Those are all things that can be, economic benefit can be derived from, that would be entered into the calculation. So I'll show that here in a minute. Later, this is just some examples here of kind of how the water boards are selecting people. This is more of a visualization. They're moving into more advanced graphics visualization to sort of figure out where the spill is happening, trending over the years, in what regions. There's the San Francisco Bay region. This is just a GIS tool they're developing here to show where all the systems are geospatially, so they can get more of an idea where the footprints are for the system. Another one here of showing how many inspections have been done in the program. You can see here over time how that looks, the grand totals and what years. And type Bs are the main ones that they're doing for the more in-depth inspections. And then who gets selected here? It's Southern California. This is really good to show where the historic enforcement actions have been done for the different violation categories, and a map kind of showing where those violations are here in Southern California. So those are just something to be aware of. There are tools that the board's developed. There's other tools they're developing. There's also a really good recommendation here, I think, to be aware of your enforcement page in your regional board, depending upon where you are. Here's the LA board. Again, this is something to check on to see if there's anything new here. That's the LA board. Here's the Santa Ana board. They're all a little bit different, but really good to stay aware of. The San Diego board here, I'll show a couple of examples of what's posted on their page for adopted administrative civil liability ACL penalty actions that they've taken here, starting with one here from the city of Laguna Beach, $1.5 million. This is just a few weeks back. More importantly, what's really important about these is to review the documents that are considered, what are they looking at, their questionnaire, the spill data that's in CWIX, any kind of response to any kind of an NOV or a 13267 water quality order, a technical investigation. Again, this is a big penalty action, okay, but the more important thing here to look at is what could have maybe been looked at beforehand, and more importantly, how does the water boards view these actions? And so that economic benefit, again, played a major role here, in this enforcement action, with $257,000 added to the penalty because the prosecution team believed there was avoided cost of bypassing this force main system that was basically they could have done under non-emergency conditions. So they had an air release valve that was failed on basically a portion of the system that was sort of offline. It was still under pressure. Nevertheless, that economic benefit plays a major role. So the other great thing here that the city of Laguna Beach should be really commended for is initiating some major measures in the city to minimize future risks along that force main. So again, this is something, again, ahead of time is better, but if it's done after the fact, this is something that needs to be pointed out, especially if it's in the SSMP and relied on for mitigating SSOs that have happened in the past. Another one, the city of San Diego. This is another big one that happened a few years back. Again, more importantly here, not the penalty, but what the board relied on. Number one, the SSMP right there, and they said it right in the evidence. So the CWIX reports, the response to the order. So these are all things that the economic benefit that the staff heavily relied on for the enforcement action. So something to be aware of if your SSMP is not ready for scrutiny, it's not ready for another set of eyes, get it ready. And I'll have some more tips in here to show you how to do that right here, starting here. So evaluating effectiveness is something that a lot of the agencies may not be doing altogether. And I find these 11 elements are the core elements in the order, but I find that 12 through 18, these are the ones that are going to really get probed on if there's any kind of an audit, if there's any kind of an enforcement action that you don't often hear about. SSMP implementation, okay, look at the order. It requires that. Training, SOPs. SOPs show up like 8 or 9 times in the order. The compliance reporting for notification, SSOs, are the 3-day draft, the 15-day certification, the questionnaire annual compliance, the audits. Are those all being done on time? Because the reporting and all this will be looked at in fine detail during an inspection or during an enforcement action. Large SSO monitoring, is that program ready to go? So these are really some good tips in addition to the regular core ones that you normally go through when you're auditing your SSMP or you're doing an update. Make sure to hit on these 12 through 18 that often get left behind. Record keeping is another one that will definitely be scrutinized during any kind of an audit or inspection by the water boards, EPA, an NGO, or even the public that want to ask about a spill. So another one here, key performance indicators. These can be added into your actual SSMP. I'll show an example real quickly from the Sal Placer Municipal Utility District that actually does this for every one of their elements. And this is D13.4, provision D13, number 4 in their SSMP. And they talk about what they're doing here in their O&M program. But you can see here they have the key performance indicators for every single, many of these items, not every one, but are these all in place? Are the, is the system in place to schedule and do the documented activities, work orders, the R&R program, the contractors being trained, does your CIP address O&M? They're constantly monitoring how effective they're doing for every element, even going up to the goals. I'll scroll up to the top here. Very impressive. The goals, it's easy to say, yeah, we want to prevent spills. Everybody says that, and have a good level of service, but are they really being implemented? So the organization, again, key performance indicators here shown in their plan, scroll down here, are all these things being updated? Is the chart current? So this is all great stuff to be monitoring during your cycles of your audits or your SSMP updates, So you can keep your finger on the pulse all the way through here. And so these are really important. They're changing their ordinances. They're making, pertinent ordinance reviews and updates here that are being tracked. So this is something you can definitely do for every one of the elements, something that we're recommending when we're looking at SSMPs or SSMP audits during these work activities. So just point those out real quick. Again, these things, the boards are going to look at things like SSLs prevented, pump station, had the grade alarms, they worked. We had the level sensors, we had flow monitoring, we had other measures, cameras, whatever, that avoided spills. These are things to definitely track if you aren't already. I find a lot of agencies are not tracking this. They might just be, tracking the failures, and that's negative. You want to see the positive things, and certainly the things highlighted here, and present that to anybody that asks, or even just have that in your SSMP. Routine cleaning, your high frequency cleaning, your root foaming. Are these costs and productions are you getting credit for these? These are definitely areas you can do for improving your effectiveness. Moving into some tips on resiliency, the staff informal draft has been released. I'm sure many of you have seen it. It's a huge 80-some page document. Again, this is draft. This is not in place yet, so there's a lot of comments going on right now on this. I was just going to point out a couple of things that I thought of for the presentation for SARBs today, for things that are related to the resiliency planning. And there's very specific things in here right now that may or may not be included. We don't know. So I'm not going to point out the ones that are in here because these are, again, not required. At the board, the State Water Board is the only one that can adopt this. And this is simply being circulated for comments. So at this point, there's been nothing formal released yet. So I'm just going to point out resiliency measures here for reducing risk, for reducing spills that should already be in place if you have a program, a good program. Right here, I'll run through these pretty quickly. If you want to go back and look later, that's great. But do you know the most likely location for your next SSOs? Are you collecting data on how you might be impacted by climate? A lot of agencies are not, but you might want to start doing that, because this is definitely an area that will be hammered on for sure in the future, and the water boards have made that very clear. Predictive monitoring. If you have failures, or you don't even have failures, or you haven't maybe done a lot of condition assessment in your force mains or your other parts of your gravity systems, are you doing any predictive monitoring? Are you checking temperatures on pumps or bearing temperatures, or are you checking motor temperatures? Any kind of predictive monitoring for oil in pumps or motors to make sure that you don't fail. Any kind of predictive monitoring, pressures, flows. A lot of agencies are. So again, that would be something that you have an early warning. It shows that you're being proactive. You're not waiting for something to happen. And that's going to, again, come into play for that economic benefit. Could for any kind of monitoring that could have been done ahead of time before the SSO occurred. Work programs are being reviewed. Capital budgets, alarms are being tested. A few more. Mutual assistance agreements. This is really big. I know for the regions in Southern California that really, are these in place? Are you having your SSMP, your audits peer reviewed? Are they being done on time? Do you have change logs you can demonstrate that you're actually implementing to show to inspectors? Reviewing the MRP. This goes on and on. So I'm just going to quickly browse through here, maybe at a couple other ones. Are you comfortable articulating your challenges recorded in your SSMP? And this is the last list here that you might want to look at later. Do you have signage on your stations? Station monitoring, again, condition assessments, fog. These are all things that really are related to resilience. Are you participating in area of excavation, ACE or USA? What's going on? These are things that the water boards, the US EPA will check and ask about your training during an audit or inspection. So again, related to resilience, again, good do-it-yourself things. You can ask these questions. You can look at your own program yourself, or bring in outside help. There's definitely advantages to that. But there's a lot of this that can be done internally, such as those. Now I'll shift into some of the things, the best management practices to share. Ralph Ramirez at the El Toro Water District sent me Some great photos, great demonstration of their fog program here. They had a presentation they did a while back. I just wanted to point out, see great things like this to really kind of just browse through and show, their BMPs, proper screening, proper scraping the walls. They're looking at, especially with COVID-19 starting back up restaurants. Ralph told me there's some big challenges here. So recommend just kind of maybe looking at this later if you want to. On education and enforcement, they have a great program. It's a well-oiled machine clearly there. So they're a great reference. Many of you probably already know. If you don't, you might want to contact them. This was pretty cool, again, as a demonstration of effort between Irvine Ranch and El Toro. Again, that mutual aid, not just saying we have an agreement, but actually, look, we're working together. We have a safety program. We have, we coordinate our training. We're doing these things sort of consistently across both agencies. Is a really good, great evidence card to hold up in your pocket if you have an audit or inspection or a question by the board. Even have them out for a tour to show them that you get the fact that you can do more with more resources, and having that mutual aid is something that's in place. So pretty cool. Just something to point out here. I'm going to end the presentation with some of the recommendations that I'm doing here. I'm definitely tooling the audits or the SSMP updates or any of the help I'm doing with unique for your regional board programs. Since I worked for the boards for so long and familiar with so many of the intricacies of the regions, their priorities, their enforcement prioritization, how they think. And I'm definitely open to helping you strategically develop your program and tool your program in your effort to their needs and what they're likely to check for their regions. A compliance evaluation inspection is definitely something that I'm recommending, I'm doing for added resilience and focusing on the effectiveness. I think it's an area, again, really doing a complete review, not just those 11 elements in isolation, looking at everything else like your records, your compliance with the MRP, with the order, and all those other areas. The implementation is very important. Well, on YouTube, Fisher Compliance has several videos, and this one included, that have been posted, and highly recommend taking a look at some of these. And please sign up on our website if you haven't yet, and give us feedback. If you want other videos, if you have other questions, or you want help on any of these do-it-yourself tips, feel free to contact me. Thanks for watching today.
Localized electric failures, maybe at a pump stations, backups into homes, line blockages and pump failures and so forth. These are the routine, and I'm certain all of these are addressed in our overflow emergency response plans. So while we focus on the probable, we want to make sure that we're not overlooking the possible. And so the possible are some bigger events like maybe floods and fires and earthquakes and regional electric power failures and so forth. These are some of the possible, but not the everyday events. And we've had enough reminders through the years that these things happen. 2019 wasn't that long ago. We had the Ridgecrest earthquake in Southern California. We're all aware of the wildfires throughout the state that are continuing to happen. And related to the wildfires are these public safety power shutdowns that some of the electric companies are doing. So with fairly short notice, a matter of a couple of days, we're being asked to run our systems without electricity for up to 72 hours. So how do we get there? How do we put our attention on the possible after we've already dealt with the probable? So one way to do this are vulnerability assessments. And so what are my system's vulnerabilities? Where are they? This is a good drill you can do in-house with all of your staff, all your field staff. You can do a brainstorming session on some of the assets that you address priorities like the likelihood of failure and the consequence of failure. And in this case, the failure would be an SSO. And then as you work through the process, then you develop, well, what's my plan to either solve this problem, so I can take care of it, or what are my mitigation measures so that I could address it and reduce the severity of the event. And then finally, when you devise a plan and so forth, we don't often get times to test them until the event comes, and that's not the best time to be figuring out how to deal with something. So we have to also, as we develop these plans, we have to develop a process that we have some high level of confidence that our new plan will work. So here's just one example of this was in my system, and this is clearly a high-risk asset for us. It's a above-grade creek crossing. As you can see, several things come down the creek. This pipe actually goes underwater during big storm events and so forth. And then when you add, in this case, the log that's up against the pipe, it just applies that much more pressure to the pipe. So this was an area of concern for us, and again, an example of a vulnerability in our system. And so when you have any aerial creek crossing, or maybe even an inverted siphon that crosses a creek, are you capable, if you had to, can you set up a bypass across the creek? Or are there alternatives where maybe you don't need a bypass, but maybe you can shuttle the sewer with a pumper truck, or there's an alternate route? Do you have what you need to do this, to set up a bypass? Do you know how long it's going to take just to mobilize? These things don't happen overnight. Um, and then if you don't have the means to bypass, how are you going to mitigate the situation? Do you have a containment plan and so forth? And then again, how do you know it can work? So I apologize, this thing's going automatically on me here, so I'll do the best I can. So Jim talked about the economic advantage. This is that same creek crossing, and we knew we had an issue, and we know we can't go winter after winter with this thing going underwater and who knows what pressing up against it. And if we lose that pipe, it's a 24-inch trunk line, so it carries a fair amount of sewer. So we solved our problem. On the left here, we drilled into the granite rock and we set rebar. We poured, this was to hold the pier in place. We poured 2 piers on each side of the creek, and both of them had about 9 yards of concrete. And then you see our final product here, where we have welded steel pipe inside a hose pipe that's 1/2-inch walls on the steel casing hose pipe. And then this has a CIPP liner inside it, just because the steel pipe didn't have a coating in there. But we did this. This was about a $260,000 job. And as Jim described earlier, had we not done something like this, and we did have a catastrophic failure and lost our pipe, the water board may have tried to play the economic advantage option that they have, and we could have been fined that in addition to the other fines that would be coming our way. So we have other areas that could be difficult too. How many of you folks have pipes that cross under a freeway or just under a real busy roadway that it's not real practical to be able to bypass across? Railroad tracks are another example of it. We had an opportunity here. This is a 36-inch trunk line going underneath Interstate 80, and we needed to bypass this. This would have been a planned bypass. But we were trying to figure out how to do it. And what we found was, we found a Caltrans culvert about 150 feet away from where we were crossing. And so we contacted Caltrans, we got permission to use their culvert. We set a Hydrovac up where the red X is. We ran it through the pipe, and we attached our lay flat hose to the nozzle and drug it on through their culvert. And we set up our bypass and were able to do our work. So after that, we took it a step further, and we contacted Caltrans and asked them for their storm drain maps, which they were happy to give us. And we found only one other place along Interstate 80 that crosses, that there was a culvert in close enough proximity that if we had to, we could bypass a pipe. So we tucked that away, and we have that information available with us. The Union Pacific Railroad was a little bit different story. They were real nice about it, but they had no way that they were able to cooperate with us. They absolutely didn't want anything on their tracks, not even lay flat hose in an emergency. So what we did is we said, okay, we can't come up with a plan for that, but we're going to document our efforts that we spoke with the railroad, This is what we talked about. This was the response we got. So it's not going to help us in an SSO event as far as dealing with the event, but it is going to help us in the eyes of the regulator that said, wow, these guys were diligent, they were prudent, at least they tried. And again, this is that economic advantage and so forth. And so again, if you have areas like this that you can't bypass, then we need to start thinking about mitigation. And I think the mitigation thread should be woven through all of your OERPs. If I can't do what I want to do, what's the next best thing that I can do? And give your trained responders kind of a check down list on how to respond to certain situations. So you're all familiar with routine containment. I'm not showing you anything here that you haven't already seen. These are the ones that are generally in our OERPs. But here's another situation. I'm making these numbers up here, but here's a 500,000 gallon a day flow rate, spill rate, which equates to 347 gallons per minute. And just for effect here, in 30 minutes, you will have spilled over 10,000 gallons, okay? So again, you become aware of this problem, and it's been spilling for however long it's been spilling. So how long will it take to mobilize your equipment? First, to try to clear the blockage, but then secondly, if need be, you probably at the same time are mobilizing your bypass equipment. You know what kind of time that takes. Have you given any thought to how you might contain a really large spill like this? I know of a few agencies, including mine, that are ready to just start mobilizing foil, and with 811 in the back of our heads for the location request. Sometimes in emergencies, you have to do what you have to do. And so some agencies either haul dirt and start mounting it, or some of them will scrape dirt and start creating a berm and so forth. But at least they have a plan, and it's in place, and it's better than nothing. And another interesting thing our agency did, we had a trunk line that was 2 million gallons a day, and it followed right along the creek, as a lot of trunk lines do. And we didn't like a spill would go right out of the manhole right into the creek, and it would be pretty significant if it happened. So we did a rim elevation study, and we found the most likely places, the lowest manholes that are going to spill if parts of this line become plugged. And once we did this, we kind of got a little bit lucky because we found an opportunity where if we sealed off 2 manholes, we dowed the cone, we poured concrete, heavy concrete collars around the frame and cover, adhered it to the cone, put a gasketed, no vent, bolt down cover on it. And what it did for us, and by the way, we've never had to put this into play, but what it did for us is the next spill point was not in the unimproved areas in the boondocks out in the field along the creek. It was actually on a paved road that led to an apartment complex. So it would have been easier to implement containment and a little bit more time before it went into the creek, but also much more visible and much more likely that someone would see it and report it to us sooner. So just again, food for thought. And then when you have a spill of this magnitude and it's in an improved area on Main Street, for instance, and you all recognize that the SSMP requires that we have the means for crowd control and traffic control, and we have to protect the environment and public health. And so one suggestion is to coordinate with your police and fire departments. They can secure an intersection or a section of road very quickly because their blue lights and red lights get a lot of attention quickly. And they can kind of hold things off until you can mobilize and get your forces out there and set up your own traffic control. So another thing, a lot of agencies use their hydrovacs they'll mobilize a hydrovac, and if they have a manhole that's overflowing, they might put the vacuum in there and start retrieving some of the sewage and try to keep it down below the rim. We all use hydrovacs to help us with containment and retrieving sewer after the fact. But what do we really know about our hydrovacs? So if you have a 12-yard hydrovac debris tank, it equates to about 2,400 gallons. Okay, now I don't think you can fill the whole thing up. You're going to have some limits there, but just for conversation's sake. So a 6-inch line that's at minimum slope running a third full is 6 gallons per minute. That 12-yard hydrovac you'll be able to hold sewer for 6 hours and 44 minutes. A 10-inch line, minimum slope running half full, 32 gallons a minute. That'll help you for about 106, or excuse me, an hour and 16 minutes. A 15-inch line, now you're just down to 15 minutes. And then when you get bigger, it's kind of like forget about it. So again, we all use these, we all know about them, but do we really know the limits? And do we have a trigger in our OERPs to tell the responders, you can use it to this point, and then after that, you have to bail and go to something else. How many folks have excessively deep manholes? We all, as a general rule, think we can get a suction lift with a positive displacement pump of 27 feet. But the truth of the matter is it's actually something less than that. And you need to know what that is. Whether it's 20 or 25 is going to be different based on your equipment and circumstance and so forth. And just another note about our pumps. We always look at the pump curve and we see what the pump is capable of. But my experience says focus on the sweet spot on that curve. Don't expect to get the max out of your pump, especially if it's been around for a while. But these curves are built on almost like laboratory classroom environments and their ideal situations. And so you really should count on the sweet spot on the curve and not the max. And so have you identified manholes that might be problematic in this way? Do you even have enough suction hose to reach down that far if you have, in my example, a 35-foot deep manhole and so forth? Or can you move to maybe the next manhole down where it's actually shallower and your pump will work in the way that you expect it to? And just a quick side note, because my agency found out after the fact, we had a new subdivision in. We had some manholes that were 35 feet deep. Turns out our winch cables for our confined space equipment, they were only 30 feet long. And so as soon as we discovered that, of course, we got new ones and longer ones and so forth. But again, something to think about, something to evaluate. Your GIS programs will help you a lot with where are your deep manholes. And here's the solution to the deep manhole problem. It's to use a submersible pump. Submersible pump, the liquid level's above the pump, and so that has a positive suction lift, and it can push sewer a lot higher than when you have the negative suction lift. And another caveat here too, if you're using lay flat hose has different pressure ratings on it, and if you're pumping over a hill that's 100 feet tall, there's 43 pounds of pressure on that hose before you turn the pump on. When you add the friction factor on a lay flat hose, and there's a lot, your pressure rating goes up quite a bit. And I've been around in one instance where the lay flat hose actually split and burst because we were applying more pressure than we should have. And we don't always get to pick where and how our failures happen, but this truck careened off the road, went through our fence and came to rest right where you see it. And as you can tell, we were pretty lucky. That's a control panel for one of our pump stations. And there's other reasons besides a careening vehicle that your control panel might fail you. You could have an electrical fire. Maybe you're in a wooded area and a tree fell, or whatever the case might be. We have to be prepared for that. And so using force main bypass manifolds is a good solution to that. You can put your suction hose in the wet well, quick connect your discharge hose to the bypass manifold, and now you're using the force main to decant your wet well. And then if need be, have you evaluated your pump stations to see if it's even feasible to set up a traditional bypass plan to take care of any instance like we just described? Or is it a small enough station that you can use your hydrovacs and decant and shuttle and so forth? And sorry, I can't turn these things off, so I'm trying to do this as best I can. Do you know where your fill point is? And once do you know where the low spot is? Do you know where the sewage is going to settle in? What's your containment plan if you can't get a bypass going and so forth? And then another thing I'm a big fan of are quick reference guides. So here's an example of one we used at my agency. Across the top, you have all of our lift stations. And this is available to the first responders. Does this station have a bypass manifold? Yes or no? Does it have an on-site generator, or does it need one of our two portable generators? And if it's a portable, which one, or both of them, which ones work at that station? If you have a bypass pump, we tell people, here's exactly the pumps we have that work at your station. If you're going to shuttle sewage in your hydrovac to decant, where's the decant manhole? We even keep the decant manhole at the map of it posted at the stations so someone can see right where to go. So again, time is of the essence when we're responding to an SSO. Quick reference guides are really valuable in that sense. So we talked about the regional power failure. So when we heard that we could be losing power at our pump stations or in our agency's service area, it got our attentions. And so tabletop exercises are really good for planning and problem solving and so forth. So what you see here in the squares are just all of our pump stations. If they're green, they have a fixed generator at them. And if they're the red outline, that means we have to transport a portable one to it. On the left, we have all of our resources, our manpower, our pumps, hydrovacs, trucks that can pull trailers, generators and so forth. So this is what we started with. And this was an all hands exercise. So we got in the group, we talked it all out, and we figured out how are we going to deploy all of our resources so that we can keep everything up and running, all of our pump stations up and running for potentially 72 hours. And this is kind of what it looked like. So I want to just really quickly put your attention here. I'm going to come back to this later, but we decided these are small pump stations and we could use a two-person crew and a hydrovac, and we could shuttle and decant the sewage and keep those pump stations up and running because our other equipment was going to be used elsewhere. So I'll come back to that. So during the tabletop exercise, a lot of questions came up. Well, if there's no power, can we even get fuel at our local cardlock station? And once we had fuel, how would we shuttle that fuel to remote sites to keep our trailered equipment up and running? And then how would we manage our personnel? Would we do 3 8-hour shifts or 2 12-hour shifts? How would we provide for meal breaks? We have everybody out there all around the clock. What methods would we use to communicate? The radio towers could be down, the cell towers could be down. What if we're already minimum staff? What if somebody became injured? What happened if we actually had a blockage on a main line or something and we had to respond? And then again, how do we know that our plan that we just developed in the classroom is going to work? So planning comes with things such as this. And this is something we did before we had SCADA, but it's much easier once you have SCADA. But do you know what the retention times are in your pump stations between the on and off float? And then if you want to take up some of your safety factor, what's the retention times if you include your overflow emergency storage? These are good when you're planning, when you're prioritizing, you want to be prepared. Which stations need the most attention from this standpoint? In other words, which ones are going to fill up the fastest and which ones can we let rest for a while? And then again, quick reference guide. This is all available. It's tabbed in the OERP. If you have that question and you want to know about it, you just go do a quick check and you look at it. So another thing is we're shuttling from pump station to pump station. These are travel times from our corporation yard to each one of our pump stations. And the longest travel time from the yard to a station is 16 minutes. But then from station to station, we have two that are only 17 minutes, but those are our longest travel times. We have some as short as 4 minutes and 2 minutes and so forth. But again, when you're planning, you want to have realistic goals. You want to know what you're up against. You only have to do this once, and now you have this information available to you, and it'll help you make better decisions when you're under pressure when the SSO is happening. We did the same with the fuel cell sizes on our equipment and the consumption rates. We have this all down in quick reference guides, and so we know which pieces of equipment can run longer before they need our attention and that we need to shuttle fuel to them. Or better yet, I don't need to worry about the so-and-so generator because that thing will run for a day on the fuel that it has. I'm going to go someplace else. So again, planning, prioritizing, and being prepared. So I'm coming back to that section when we did the tabletop exercise. We originally thought using the Hydrovac that we could decant these 3 pump stations by going from 8 to 7 to 3 back to 8, and we were going to go around like this. But when we were doing the tabletop exercise, we weren't in total consensus about how this would work or even if it would work. So what we did is we developed a time and motion study. And so this is just a quick glance. I won't get into it, but you design your time and motion study, and it's kind of like a standard operating procedure. You say exactly what you're going to do and where you're going to go and how you're going to decant, where you're going to shuttle, all these things. So you develop your study. But what we learned on this was Station 8, by the time you left it and came back to it, we were solid. We had a 38-minute safety factor, so we were looking good. Station 3, we had a 75-minute safety factor. So once we pumped it down and we came back to it again, we had 75 minutes of extra time. But station number 7, we actually had a 21-minute deficit. And this is real fortunate on our part that we did this study prior to actually having to put this into play. So here's how we originally thought we were going to do it. And all we had to do was adjust our travel route to go from 8 to 7 to 3, back to 7 to 8. We tested it one more time. It worked no problem. Now we know. And again, these things, they seem like they take a lot of time, and some of them do, but you do them once and now you know. So easement roads, they're not all pristine like this one. Some of them have issues and so forth. But again, you're only as strong as your weakest link. If you have a trunk line out on an easement road and you've lost part of your easement road during a storm or something, how are you going to take care of that? Well, in my neck of the woods, we had problems a lot of times with beavers. And so the stream turns into a pond, and then part of our easement road's underwater and so forth. So we always kept a truck and transfer load of this 7-inch fractured stone. This was at our yard. This would help us bridge wet areas that were pumping on the way in and so forth. You can bridge the combination of the fractured stone and trench plate to help displace the pressure and make it a little bit easier to get across is a good solution. And then this isn't something we did, but we've always maintained some large diameter, 15, 18-inch diameter ductile iron pipe. It's no good to us from a sewer standpoint, but we have room in the yard to store it. So we've kept it for culverts. And if you have a localized area that washes out and you can't get through it, you can construct a bridge pretty quickly. And again, just some examples of the possible instances that we have to deal with, but they're not very likely. So again, and then document your periodic inspections of your easements. Hopefully you're doing that. Again, when the water board comes and looks and they want to know what you were doing before the SSO occurred, you want to make sure that you can demonstrate your diligence. So as we get close to wrapping up here, I mentioned this earlier, mitigation, our plans don't always work, but what's our fallback plan? Again, if I can't bypass something, how am I going to contain it? So if the plan A fails, what's your mitigation measures? And again, just a suggestion from my experience, if you include these in your OERP triggers for your responders to know, okay, I've tried for this long, I'm getting nowhere, then they can drop back to their plan B. So this is a photo of a capacity spill we had at my agency in February of 2017. And when I became aware of it, the crew, they'd been out there most of the night, and I became aware of it. I went out. I said, how come we're not shuttling with the Hydrovac? And they're like, well, we can't even begin to keep up. And I'm like, well, no, we need to shuttle. We need to do what we can. So long story short, we were able to shuttle almost 20,000 gallons of sewage. We had to end up reporting 37,000, but we actually shuttled almost 20,000 gallons worth of sewage. If we had been fined, as the water code says we can be fined, $10 a gallon, it would have been about almost a $200,000 fine for the gallons that we spilled. So again, my guys used the term, it was like spitting in the ocean. I'm like, fine, let's spit in the ocean. Let's do the best we can. So as you look at your system, you look at likelihood of failure and consequence of failure. So assess all your assets, find your high risk assets, assess your circumstances. Each agency has a little bit different circumstances than others. Find your gaps or your problems, prioritize them, resolve the gaps, and then whenever you can, make sure you know that you're not guessing or assuming. And then very important, provide training to your personnel. And anytime you provide training, I think it's important to require demonstrated ability. So again, I know this person can do this task because. So, and one last thing before we go, there's a lot going on there, and the old adage, you know, or question, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. This is how you approach it. Once you identify some shortcomings or areas that you think you would like to improve, start tackling them. So with that, we're at the end here, and I believe it will be opening up to questions. So I'll pass it back to Dindo.